Hi, I'm Professor Mark Grabowski, and this video lecture will explain the assignment on the informative or demonstrative speech. First, I'll go over the instructions or how to do the assignment. Then I will offer some tips on how to give your speech effectively. Then I will explain the grading for this speech, how I'll grade your speech, what it will be based on. And finally, there are a number of supplements I'm going to refer you to, other videos, such as an explanation about how to use visual aids, how to outline, how to conduct research, that you should also take a look at in preparation for this speech. So the first thing you need to do is choose which type of speech you'll do. If you choose to do a straight up informative speech, that requires you to inform or educate your audience on a particular subject matter. Another form of the informative speech is the demonstrative speech. It's kind of an offshoot of the informative speech, but it's a slightly different. It requires you to teach your audience how to do something through the process of showing them how something is done. So for an example, an informative speech, you might go and talk about a country you visited when you were studying abroad. If you're doing a demonstration speech, you might go and show the audience how to perform CPR. Okay, so here are the basic instructions for this speech. Unlike the oral reading speech, for this speech you're going to have to write your own speech. Therefore, you're going to have to conduct research because no one's born an expert on any topic. You only learn about things by researching them, and because you're going to be using other people's information or information from other sources, you need to cite where you got that information. Otherwise, if you just give the speech and you don't credit your sources, that's technically plagiarism, and you will lose points for failing to cite your sources. These speeches should be 5 minutes to 6 minutes long, so you want to make sure you practice so you fall within the time limits, because if you're significantly under or over, you will lose points. Also follow the proper format. That not only means making sure you deliver your speech in the time limit, but also that you have an introduction, that you have an organized body, and that you have a conclusion. I'll get into more details about that later. For this assignment, you also need to use a visual aid. That's mandatory. If you don't use a visual aid, you will lose points. A lot of students choose to use PowerPoint. You could use a video or something like that. As I said before, the key to public speaking is preparation and practice. You really need to practice your speech over and over again. If you only practice it once, or if the first time you're giving it to other people is on your actual speech day in class, it's not going to go that well. So you need to practice it in front of the mirror and then in front of your friends, family, roommate, whatever. And finally, for this speech and all of your remaining speeches, you will need to submit an outline, and along with works cited. I'll explain that in a bit more detail later on. So you want to be sure to read the full directions, which are available online at cubreporters.org/informative_speech if you're doing the informative speech, and if you're doing the demonstrative speech, it's cubreporters.org/demonstrative_speech. Because as I mentioned before, you will lose points if you don't follow the proper format and all the instructions for the speech. So you want to go and carefully review those directions and make sure you do everything that's expected of you in this speech assignment. Okay, so let's talk generally about informative speeches, and this also applies to demonstrative speeches, which are a form of informative speeches. Informative speaking offers you an opportunity to practice your researching, writing, organizing, and speaking skills. You will learn how to discover and present information clearly, and if you take the time to thoroughly research and understand your topic, to create a clearly organized speech, and to practice an enthusiastic, dynamic style of delivery, you can be an effective teacher during your informative speech. Remember, the goal of this speech is to convey knowledge and understanding on a particular subject. So in that sense, you're kind of going to be like a teacher. You're going to be teaching your audience something. However, your goal is not to advocate a cause. Okay, this isn't an opinion speech. That will come later on when we have our persuasive speeches. So you want to just stick to the facts. For example, if you're doing a speech on vegetarianism, there's a lot of informative information you can tell us about that, but you want to be careful not to sort of take on an advocate role and be like, oh, you should stop eating meat because it hurts innocent animals, things like that. That would step over the bounds and become a persuasive speech. This is not a persuasive speech, and it's an informative speech. So the purpose of the informative speech is to provide interesting, useful, and unique information to your audience by dedicating yourself to the goals of providing information and appealing to your audience. You can take a positive step toward succeeding in your efforts as an informative speaker. And the good thing about this speech is, you're going to get a chance to practice a type of speaking that you will undoubtedly use later on in your college career and professional career. The informative speech may be the most common type of speech that people give in public. Okay, so here are some general guidelines for giving an informative speech. The first tip is don't overestimate what the audience knows. I've seen way too many speeches that failed on this point. The speaker appeared totally unconscious of the general public's widespread and profound ignorance regarding their particular topic. And what would happen was the speaker would ramble on, uttering thoughts, using phrases that fitted into their own experience that they understood and that were meaningful to them, but that the audience had no idea, they couldn't relate to, they had no idea what they were talking about, so they just sat there completely lost. Alright, so what can you as a speaker do to make sure you avoid this, to make sure that you're not speaking over the audience's head, you're not speaking in terms they can't relate to? Well, I would suggest following the advice of a former United States Senator. He suggested it is a good practice to pick out the least intelligent looking person in the audience and strive to make that person interested in your argument. This can be done only by lucid statements of fact and clear reasoning. An even better method is to center your talk on some small boy or girl present with parents. Say to yourself, say out loud to your audience if you like, that you will try to be so plain that the child will understand and remember your explanation of the question discussed, and after the meeting be able to tell you what you have said. Now obviously we don't have any small children in our class, so you'll either have to imagine there's one, or just keep in mind that while most of the audience are your peers, people your age, I'm also in the class and I'm older than you, so there may be some slang or terms or concepts that I'm not familiar with because I'm in a different generation. So just be mindful that your audience can be and will be diverse usually when you give a public speech. So that brings me to my second point, which is to relate the subject directly to the audience. Put it in terms that they can understand. For example, if you're talking about the state of Alaska, say you're from Alaska and you want to give a informative speech on that, you wouldn't want to go and say that it's 590,804 square miles without at least offering some explanation, because that's just such a huge number. I don't think anyone could really visualize what that number means. However, if you go and say something like, the state of Alaska is more than equals the combined areas of Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, West Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, and Mississippi, your audience realizes that in Alaska there's plenty of room to move around. Some years ago, someone gave a speech on the high number of fatal accidents on highways in the United States, and they described it this way. You are driving across the country from New York to Los Angeles. Instead of highway markers, imagine coffins standing upright in the earth, each containing a victim of last year's slaughter on the roads. As you speed along, your car passes one of these gruesome markers every 5 seconds, and they are spaced 12 to a mile from one end of the country to the other. So now, as a result, every time you go out driving, you kind of have this startling image of these markers on the highway. So that's an example of putting something in terms that people can relate to. Okay, the third piece of advice is don't be too technical. As Aristotle once said, think as wise men do, but speak as the common people do. If you must use a technical term, don't use it until you have explained it so everybody in the audience knows what it means. I once had a student give a speech. He was talking about baseball, and he said how before the great home run chase, stadiums, they'd get 10,000 people a game, and then after it or during it they were selling out. And his point was that 10,000 wasn't a lot of people, but not everyone realizes that. I mean, if you're a college basketball team, 10,000 would be a lot of people. I mean, I don't think Marist Gym even holds 10,000 people. If you're a professional soccer team, 10,000 would be a good turnout. So he didn't do a really good job of explaining what he meant by that. A better example would have just been to have said, before the home run chase between Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa, baseball stadiums were only selling a fraction of their seats. Okay, fourth point, avoid abstractions. Be specific. For example, you may think you understand and agree with me when I say we all want success, but surely we don't all want the same things. Success means different things to each of us, and you can't be sure of what I mean with that abstract term. On the other hand, if I say, I want a gold Rolex on my wrist and a Mercedes in my driveway, you know exactly what I mean. And you know whether you want the same things or different things. So you can see that concrete terms are clearer and more interesting than abstract terms. Similarly, you want to use specific terms rather than general terms. For example, if I say furniture, all kinds of different things may come to mind depending on who you are. But if I say lazy boy rocker recliner, that's much more specific and you know exactly what I'm talking about. So when you give your speeches, don't leave any room for confusion or interpretation. Try to be as specific as possible. Final tip, you want to personalize your ideas. Nothing enlivens a speech more than personal illustrations. People are interested in people. They react to stories, not statistics. Whenever possible, therefore, you should try to personalize your ideas and dramatize them in human terms. So those are some general tips on giving your speech. Now let's talk about what your speech will be on, how to decide what it is that you're going to talk about. So first we'll talk about the types of informative speeches, and then we'll talk more specifically about how to select a topic. There are basically 4 types of informative speeches. Speeches about objects, speeches about processes, speeches about events, and speeches about concepts. Now let's talk about each in more detail. First, speeches about objects focus on things existing in the world. Objects include, among other things, people, places, animals, or products. Because you are speaking under time constraints, you cannot discuss any topic in its entirety. Instead, limit your speech to a focused discussion of some aspect of your topic. Some example topics for speeches about objects include the Central Intelligence Agency, tombstones, surgical lasers, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the pituitary gland, and lemmings. To focus these topics, you could give a speech, for example, about Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his efforts to conceal how he suffered from polio while he was in office. Or a speech about tombstones could focus on the creation and original designs of grave markers. Speeches about processes focus on patterns of action. One type of speech about processes, the demonstration speech, teaches people how to perform a process. More frequently, however, you will use process speeches to explain a process in broader terms. This way, the audience is more likely to understand the importance or the context of the process. So, a speech about how milk is pasteurized would not teach the audience how to milk cows. Rather, this speech could help audience members understand the process by making explicit connections between patterns of action, that is, the pasteurization process, and outcomes, that is, a safe milk supply. Other examples of speeches about processes include how the internet works, not how to work the internet, how to construct a good informative speech, and how to research the job market. As with any speech, be sure to limit your discussion to information you can explain clearly and completely within time constraints. Remember, you only have 5 to 6 minutes to give this speech. Speeches about events focus on things that happened, are happening, or will happen. When speaking about an event, remember to relate the topic to your audience. A speech chronicling history is informative, but you should adapt the information to your audience and provide them with some way to use the information. As always, limit your focus to those aspects of an event that can be adequately discussed within the time limitations of your assignment. Examples of speeches about events might include the 1963 Civil Rights March on Washington, Groundhog's Day, the Battle of the Bulge, the World Series, and the recent presidential election. Although I might avoid that last topic because you might accidentally or be tempted to sort of put in some of your own opinion and change the speech from an informative speech to a persuasive speech, and you'll lose major points if you do that. And finally, there are speeches about concepts. Speeches about concepts focus on beliefs, ideas, and theories. While speeches about objects, processes, and events are fairly concrete, speeches about concepts are more abstract. Take care to be clear and understandable when creating and presenting a speech about a concept. When selecting a concept, remember, you are crafting an informative speech. Often speeches about concepts take on a persuasive tone. Focus your efforts toward providing unbiased information and refrain from making arguments. Because concepts can be vague and involved, limit your speech to aspects that can be readily explained and understood within the time limits. And some examples of topics for concrete speeches include democracy, Taoism, principles of feminism, the philosophy of nonviolent protest, and the Big Bang Theory. So how do you choose an appropriate and interesting informative speech topic? If you think this is a difficult task, you're not alone. For many college students, choosing good speech topics is one of the most challenging parts of their public speaking class. Learning how to pick the right topic is an important part of developing strong public speaking skills. The first thing to remember when you're writing an informative speech is this: you need to find something to teach the audience, because for the duration of your short speech, you are the teacher, and it's your job to provide your students, the audience, with some clear and useful information. So what are some criteria for selecting a good informative speech topic? Well, here are some tips. First, speak about something you know about. Pick something that you already have some knowledge about. Otherwise, you're going to have to do an awful lot of research to be able to speak with confidence about your topic. Second, speak about something you care about. Enthusiastic teachers are good teachers, right? You know that from being a student, right? Well, the audience isn't going to listen or learn much unless you convey to them that this is a topic worth learning about. Speak about something the audience will care about. This is very important. If you speak about something that is relevant to your audience, they are much more likely to pay attention and learn something. Fourth, choose a topic that is of interest to the whole audience. A speech about trendy handbags might be of interest to some people in the class, but probably not to everyone, probably not to a lot of the guys in the class. Similarly, if you're doing a speech on how to throw a changeup in baseball, that might appeal to a few people in the class, but probably not to the vast majority. Be careful not to lose part of your audience. Choose a topic that's going to appeal to the vast majority of people. Okay, my fifth tip for selecting an informative speech topic is to select a topic that's not too broad. If you choose a topic that's too broad, you're not going to have enough time to talk about it much in detail. For example, don't give a speech about museums in Europe. There's thousands of them, so this topic is way too broad. Instead, narrow it down to something like art museums in Amsterdam. That's a much more manageable topic. You also don't want to choose a topic that's too narrow, but this is much less of a common problem than choosing a speech that's too broad. Sixth, avoid topics that everyone already knows about. If the information in your speech is already known, your speech isn't going to inform them of anything new. So don't give a speech about freshman orientation or about popular student hangouts. Seventh, avoid highly complex topics. We've kind of touched on this a little bit before, but as I said, you only have a short amount of time to give this speech, 5 or 6 minutes, so explaining a technical or complicated issue is very difficult, or at least explaining it well is difficult. Complex speeches tend to be filled with jargon or technical words that most of your audience is not familiar with, so avoid highly complex topics. And my final tip on selecting a informative speech topic is to make sure your speech isn't actually a persuasive speech. This is very important, and I will lower your grade if you fail to do this. Remember, we're going to do persuasive speeches later in the semester. Right now we're doing informative speeches. So remember the difference. An informative speech teaches the audience about something. A persuasive speech asks the audience members to change their attitudes or behaviors. So be careful not to cross the line. Now, the skillful use of supporting materials often makes the difference between a poor speech and a good one. Remember, this speech is going to require some research, all right? It's not as simple just as your previous speech, just going and finding a reading you like and reciting it. You're going to have to spend some time in the library looking at newspaper articles, journal articles, books, perhaps interviewing people, talking to people, things like that for this speech. This isn't just something you can put together off the top of your head. Remember, you also need to cite your sources or you will lose points. So what are supporting materials? Well, supporting materials are used to support a speaker's ideas. And the three major kinds of supporting materials are examples, statistics, and testimony. You must decide which ideas need to be supported given your audience, given your topic, and given your specific purpose. You must evaluate your supporting materials to make sure they really do back up your ideas. So you want to make sure you take a look at the video I posted on researching. You want to make sure you use credible sources, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask me, because if you use sources that aren't good sources like Wikipedia, I will deduct points. And remember, you need to properly cite your sources. Don't go and say according to Google. Google's the search engine you use to find your information. It's not the actual source. So it's very important that you use credible sources, that they are up to date, and that they're relevant. And just a warning, you need to be really careful. I know a lot of you like to do your research online. There's a lot of junk out on the website. A lot of people have personal websites, but they're not experts, and you shouldn't trust their information. You certainly shouldn't cite it in your speech, okay? So if you have any questions about whether something's a good source, ask me or consult a librarian. Okay, now let's talk about how to put your speech together, how to organize it. All speeches have three parts: a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning is your introduction. The middle is where you're going to spend most of your time speaking. That's the body of your speech. And then the ending is your conclusion. So for this speech, since you have 5 to 6 minutes, I would suggest spending about 45 seconds to a minute on your introduction. You're going to spend most of your time, about 4 minutes, on the body of your speech, and you want to just stick to 3 to 5 main points, because if you have more points than that, you won't have enough time to adequately cover each point. And then finally, you want to wrap up your speech, conclude it in that final minute. So let's look at each of these 3 components in depth. The first thing you need is an introduction. The introduction sets the tone for the entire speech. The introduction should be brief and to the point, as it accomplishes several important tasks. Typically, there are 6 main components of an effective introduction. You have the attention getter, you have the thesis statement, that's followed by the audience adaptation, then the credibility statement, preview of the body of your speech, and then the transition to the body of your speech. As in any social situation, your audience makes strong assumptions about you during the first 8 or 10 seconds of your speech. For this reason, you need to start solidly and launch the topic clearly. Focus your efforts on completing these tasks, getting them out of the way so you can move on to the real information, which is the body of your speech. As I said, typically there's 6 main components of an effective introduction. These tasks do not have to be handled in this order, but this layout often yields the best results. So in your introduction, you always want to begin with the attention getter. The attention getter is designed to intrigue the audience members and to motivate them to listen attentively for the next 5 to 6 minutes. There are infinite possibilities for attention-getting devices. Some of the more common devices include, telling an anecdote, asking a rhetorical question, or beginning with a compelling statement or statistic or shocking statistic. While any of these devices can be effective, it is important that you spend time strategizing, creating, and practicing the attention getter. Because remember, as I said, first impressions matter. Those first 8 to 10 seconds are really crucial, and that's when you'll be doing this attention getter. Most importantly, the attention getter should create curiosity in the minds of your listeners and convince them that the speech will be interesting and useful. The wording of your attention getter should be refined and practiced. Be sure to consider the mood and tone of your speech, determine the appropriateness of humor, emotion, aggressiveness, etc. Not only should the words get the audience's attention, but your delivery should be smooth and confident to let the audience know that you're a skilled speaker who's prepared for this speech. Now, after the attention getter comes the thesis statement, and a lot of people get these 2 things mixed up, or a lot of people, they skip the attention getter and just begin with the thesis statement. The attention getter is what you use to sort of, like I said, create curiosity among your audience members, to get them curious about your topic and want to hear what you're going to talk about. The thesis statement is where you actually tell them what you're going to talk about. So, for example, if you're talking about cancer, you wouldn't want to begin by saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to talk to you today about cancer." All right, that's a boring introduction, and it's not going to make the audience kind of more interested in your topic or curious. Everyone's heard about cancer a billion times. They're probably going to lose interest. That's a thesis statement. You don't begin with that. Okay, it comes after your catchy beginning. A better beginning might be something like, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to talk to you today about something very serious." Take a look around you, look at the person next to you, look at the person in front of you, and look at the person behind you. One of you 4 is going to die of what I'm going to talk to you about, but it doesn't have to be that way. The good news is that with education and health screenings, you can avoid cancer. Okay, so that would be a catchy beginning. You don't begin by just saying, "I'm here to talk to you about cancer." That's a thesis statement. It comes after the attention getter. If you don't have a catchy beginning, you're going to lose points. So make sure you give your attention getter, your introduction, that first 10 seconds of your speech, some careful thought. It's really important to your speech. So to reiterate, after your attention getter comes your thesis statement, thesis statement is crucial for clearly communicating your topic and purpose to the audience. Be sure to make the statement clear, concise, and easy to remember. So just to go back over it again, remember with the attention getter, the catchy beginning, there's all sorts of different devices you can use, like a shocking quote, a startling statement, a rhetorical question, humor, whatever. After that, then you get into the thesis statement. That's where you tell your audience what you're actually going to talk to them about. Okay, after the attention getter and the thesis statement comes the audience adaptation. So this is the third part of the introduction, and you do this because you need to adapt your speech to your audience. In order to keep audience members interested, you have to tell them why your topic is important to them. So to accomplish this task, you need to undertake audience analysis prior to creating the speech. Think about who you're giving this speech to, your classmates and me. Figure out what sort of things are important to them, what their biases may be, and what types of subjects or issues appeal to them. Now, in the context of this class, some of your audience analysis is already provided. It's already pretty apparent. All the listeners, except for me, are going to be college students. So it's likely that they place some value on education. Most of them are probably not bathing in money, and they all currently live in the area, in the Poughkeepsie area. So consider these traits when you determine how to adapt to your audience. And sometimes this audience adaptation can be sort of combined or mixed into the the attention getter and the thesis statement. For example, in that previous example I gave about cancer, you tell the audience that 1 of 4 of you may end up with cancer. I mean, you're directly sort of speaking to them and giving them information that they can identify with. But basically, the audience adaptation part is sort of the who cares test. You're telling the audience why they should care about your topic. Why are you up there speaking to them? So just to repeat, remember you have the attention getter, then you've got the thesis statement, and then the audience adaptation. So catchy beginning, then you tell the audience what exactly you're talking about, and then you tell them why they should care about your speech, what you're telling them about. And after all that, after those three things, comes your credibility statement. So this is still part of the introduction. The credibility statement establishes your qualifications as a speaker. You should come up with reasons why you're someone to listen to on this topic. Why do you have special knowledge or understanding of this topic? What can the audience learn from you that they couldn't learn from someone else? Credibility statements can refer to your extensive research on a topic, your lifelong interest in an issue, your personal experience with a thing, or your desire to better the lives of your listeners by sifting through the topic and providing the crucial information. And once you can establish your credibility, the audience is more likely to listen to you as something of an expert and to consider what you have to say to be the truth. So credibility statement is another important part of your introduction and in getting your audience to pay attention to you. Now the next step in the introduction is to preview the main points of your speech. You should preview every main body point and identify each as a separate piece of the body. The purpose of this preview is to let the audience members prepare themselves for the flow of the speech. Therefore, you should word the preview clearly and concisely, attempt to use parallel structure for each part of the preview, and avoid delving into the main point. Simply tell the audience what the main point will be about in general. Use the preview to briefly establish your structure and then move on. Let the audience get a taste of how you will divide the topic and fulfill the thesis and then move on. This important tool will reinforce the information in the minds of your listeners, and it's really important when you give a speech because unlike when you're reading a book or an article, you can see how long the article is going to be. You can see the table of contents so you know what the book is going to address. When you're giving a speech, your audience has no idea where you're going with it. So that's why you do this preview of the points to sort of give them an outline in their heads, a sort of table of contents previewing what they're going to learn about. And then after you accomplish the first 5 components of the introduction that I just discussed, you should make a clean transition to the body of the speech. Use this transition to signal a change and prepare the audience to begin processing specific topical information. You should round out the introduction, reinforce the excitement and interest that you created in the audience during the introduction, and slide into the first main body point. So that brings us to the body of your speech, and here it's really important to keep it clearly organized because this is, the body has the bulk of information in your speech, and without clear organization, the audience will probably forget your information, your main points, perhaps even your thesis. But some simple strategies will help you create a clear and memorable speech. So let's discuss them. So the first thing you want to do when organizing your body is figure out what are your main points. Once you settle on a topic, you should decide which aspects of that topic are of the greatest importance for your speech. These aspects become your main points. While there is no rule about how many main points should appear in the body of a speech, most students go with 3 or 4 main points. You must have at least 2 main points. And aside from that rule, you should select your main points based on the importance of the information and the time limitations. Remember, you only have 6 minutes total for this speech. You're probably going to spend about 4 of those minutes on the body of your speech, so figure about a minute per point. If you try to cram in several points, you're not going to probably adequately explain some of them, and the audience will be confused, and your speech won't be as effective. So just stick to 3 or 4 main points. And as you choose your main points, try to give each point equal attention within the speech. So if you pick 3 main points, each point should take up roughly 1/3 of the body section of your speech. So once you've decided on your main points, the next thing you need to decide is what pattern are you going to use to organize your main points? And there are 4 basic patterns of organization for an informative speech. One is chronological order, another is spatial order, the third is causal order, and the final way you can organize an informative speech is topical order. You can choose any of these patterns, but the one you want to go with is whichever one you think serves the needs of your speech best. So let me explain each a little bit in detail. First, chronological order. A speech organized chronologically has main points oriented toward time. For example, a speech about the Farm Aid benefit concert could have main points organized chronologically. The first main point focuses on the creation of the event. The second main point focuses on the planning stages. The third point focuses on the actual performance, the concert, and the fourth point focuses on donations and assistance that resulted from the entire process. In this format, the chronological order format, you discuss main points in an order that could be followed on a calendar or a clock. Second, we have spatial order. A speech organized spatially has main points oriented towards space or a directional pattern. The Farm Aid speech body could have been organized in a spatial order as well. The first main point discusses the New York branch of the organization. The second main point discusses the Midwest branch. And the third point discusses the California branch of Farm Aid. In this format, you discuss main points in an order that could be traced on a map. The third way to organize a speech is through causal order. A speech organized causally has many points oriented towards cause and effect. The main points of a Farm Aid speech organized causally could look like this. The first main point informs about problems on farms and the need for monetary assistance. The second main point discusses the creation and implementation of the Farm Aid program. In this format, you discuss main points in an order that alerts the audience to a problem or circumstance and then tells the audience what action resulted from the original circumstance. So it's a cause and effect approach to organization. And then the fourth and final approach you can use for organizing the body of your speech is topical order. A speech organized topically has main points organized more randomly by subtopics. So, for example, the farm-aid speech, the hypothetical that I've been using, could be organized topically. The first main point discusses farm-aid administrators. The second main point discusses performers. The third main point discusses sponsors. The fourth main point discusses audiences. In this format, you discuss main points in a more random order that labels specific aspects of the topic and addresses them in separate categories. Most speeches that are not organized chronologically, spatially, or causally are organized topically. Now let's talk about the next tool that's going to help make your speech more clear and easy to follow, and that is connective devices. Within the body of your speech, you need clear internal structure. Connectives are devices used to create a clear flow between ideas and points within the body of your speech. They serve to tie the speech together. There are four main types of connective devices: transitions, internal previews, internal summaries, and signposts. Think of connectives as hooks and ladders for the audience to use when moving from point to point within the body of your speech. These devices help refocus the minds of audience members and remind them of which main point your information is supporting. So let's discuss each one in detail. First, transitions are brief statements that tell the audience to shift gears between ideas. Transitions serve as the glue that holds the speech together and allow the audience to predict where the next portion of the speech will go. For example, once you have previewed your main points and you want to move from the introduction to the body of the farm-aid speech, you might say, to gain an adequate understanding of the intricacies of this philanthropic group, we need to look at some specific information about farm aid. We'll begin by looking at the administrative branch of this massive fundraising organization. Internal previews are used to preview the parts of a main point. Internal previews are more focused than, but serve the same purpose as, the preview you will use in the introduction of the speech. For example, with that farm aid example I've been using, you might create an internal preview for the complex main point dealing with farm aid performers. It might go something like this. In examining the farm aid performers, we must acknowledge the presence of entertainers from different genres of music: country and western, rhythm and blues, rock and pop, hip hop and rap. Okay? So the internal preview provides specific information for the audience if a main point is complex or potentially confusing. Internal summaries are the reverse of internal previews. Internal summaries restate specific parts of a main point. To internally summarize the main point dealing with farm aid performers, you might say, you now know what types of people perform at the farm aid benefit concerts. The entertainers come from a wide range of musical genres: country and western, rhythm and blues, rock and pop, hip hop and rap. Okay, so when using both internal previews and internal summaries, be sure to stylize the language in each so you don't become redundant. And finally, signposts are brief statements that remind the audience where you are within the speech. So if you have a long point, you may want to remind the audience of what main point you're on. For example, with the farm aid speech, you might say something like, continuing my discussion of farm aid performers, blah, blah, blah. And then finally, throughout the body of your speech, you want to make sure that you are offering materials to support your speech. And as I said before, there are three main ways to do this, three main types of materials you can use. They are examples, statistics, and testimony. So let's talk about each in more detail. Okay, first, examples. There's a few different types of examples you can use. First, you have brief examples. These are a specific case referred to in passing to illustrate a point. Next, you have extended examples. These are a story, a narrative, or an anecdote developed at some length to illustrate a point. And then you have hypothetical examples, which are an example that describes an imaginary or fictitious situation. Some tips for using examples. Use examples to clarify your ideas. Examples put abstract ideas into concrete terms that listeners can easily understand. So make sure you use imagery that your audience can visualize, and use examples to reinforce your ideas. Make sure your examples are representative, that they do not deal with unusual or exceptional cases. Your listeners are sure to feel betrayed if they suspect that you have chosen an atypical example to prove a general point. You can use examples to personalize your ideas. People are interested in people. Whenever you talk to a general audience, you can include examples that will add human interest to your speech. And make sure you practice delivery to enhance your extended examples. Uh, an extended example is just like a story, and the impact of your story will depend as much on delivery as on content. Speak faster here to create a sense of action, slower there to build suspense, raise your voice in some places, lower it in others, pause occasionally for dramatic effect. Something else you can use to provide supporting material for your speech is statistics or numerical data. These make the speaker's claim credible and specific. A few tips on statistics: make sure you use them correctly. Remember, the mean and the median and the mode are all different, so make sure you understand them. And make sure that the statistics come from a reliable source. As a speaker, you must be aware of possible bias in the use of numbers. Since statistics can be interpreted so many ways and put to so many uses, you should seek figures gathered by objective, nonpartisan sources. For example, which source is more reliable to estimate the environmental dangers of toxic waste in a landfill? One from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, or one compiled by the company that owns the landfill, or one compiled by Greenpeace? It would be the first, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, government agency, because those other two, have their own agendas. And you want to be careful not to overdo it with statistics. Use them sparingly. Don't clutter your presentations with numbers from beginning to end. Makes it boring. And insert statistics only when they are needed. And make sure that they're easy to grasp. Like I gave that example about Alaska and its square mileage size. You might need to quantify it and put it in terms that your audience can understand. And then the third thing you can use to support your speech and provide evidence is testimony. So this is like quotations or paraphrases used to support a point. And the reason you use them is because just as you are likely to be swayed by your friend's recommendation about which class to take, audiences also tend to respect the opinions of people who have special knowledge or expertise on the topic at hand. Now, there are two types of testimony: expert testimony and peer testimony. Expert testimony comes from people who are recognized experts in their fields. Citing views of people who are experts is a good way to lend credibility to your speeches. It shows that you're not just mouthing your opinions, but that your position is supported by people who are knowledgeable about the topic. And then peer testimony is testimony from ordinary people with firsthand experience or insight on a topic. Peer testimony is especially valuable because it gives a more personal viewpoint on issues that then can be gained from expert testimony. And peer testimony conveys the feelings, the knowledge, the insight of people who speak with the voice of a genuine experience. When you are providing testimony, you can either quote it or paraphrase it. So the difference is a direct quotation is where you present the testimony word for word. A paraphrase is where you restate or summarize a source's ideas in your own words. Quotations are most effective when they are brief, when they convey your meaning better than you can, and when they are compelling. But sometimes it's better to paraphrase in two situations in particular. First, when the wording of a quotation is obscure, as in government documents, or when it's full of jargon or something like that, it might just be easier for you to rephrase it in layman's terms that your audience can understand. And the other case is when the quotation is longer than 2 or 3 sentences. That's because audiences often tune out partway through lengthy quotations, which tends to interrupt the flow of your ideas. And when you use quotations and paraphrases, make sure you do it accurately. Make sure you don't misquote someone. or take the meaning of what they said out of context. And then finally, make sure your testimony is from qualified sources. Listeners will find your speeches much more credible if you use testimony from sources qualified to speak on the subject at hand. And with your testimony, as with statistics and examples, you need to cite your sources. Don't just offer them. Don't just say 70% of people feel this way, a poll found. You need to say which poll it was, the date of the poll. You need to offer some information about it so the audience can assess whether or not it's a good source. Okay, so now that we've covered how to do the speech, let's talk about how you're going to be graded. Remember, for this speech, you're going to be graded on both your delivery as well as the content of your speech. So you not only need to, deliver a good speech, you also need to write a good speech. I strongly suggest rereading the directions. Make sure you do everything that's asked and expected of you and explained in the directions, because if you fail to do anything, you'll lose points. As they say, the devil is in the details. Forgetting to do something small like citing your sources can mean the difference between an A or an A minus. And if you leave out a few of those things, like you don't cite your sources and you go over the time limit, and well, before you know it, you can be down to B minus or C plus. Now, in the past, students have commonly lost points for a few mistakes, common mistakes, but easily avoidable mistakes. And I'll go over these. The first is not having a good introduction. For example, they begin with a thesis statement, such as, I'm here to discuss how to bake a cake, or I'm here to talk to you about cancer. Remember, that's a thesis statement. That's not a attention getter. You need to begin with a good attention getter. If you don't have visual aids, or a visual aid, such as a PowerPoint presentation, you will lose points. If you forget to submit an outline, you will lose points. Remember, an outline is not the same as typing out your speech entirely. An outline is just a summary of your main points. Make sure you type it out ahead of time. Don't wait until right before class to type it out, because you never know when the printers might not be working or something like that. Okay, I won't accept any lame excuses like, oh, the printers weren't working, the computer lab. Do it ahead of time so you avoid any problems like that. Students have also lost points for not using signposts. For example, now let's move on to our next step, or secondly, or in conclusion, signposts like that. Basically, just to reiterate, a signpost tells the listener where the speaker is in the speech. Make sure that you use it. And the reason for that is listeners, unlike readers, cannot flip back to a previous page if they have trouble grasping a speaker's ideas or where they are in a speech. So it's important to use those signposts so they know where they are in the speech. A few more things that students have lost points for: not citing their sources of their information, or in their speeches, or not citing them in proper format in their outlines. You need to use either MLA or APA format. Okay, so don't just list a web address, the URL. That tells me nothing about the source. You need to follow the proper formats that are used in academic papers. Another area that's a major problem for students in all of their speeches is eye contact. Okay, a lot of students will just read off their paper or notes more than they look at the audience. If you do this, you're probably not going to be able to get above a B. Eye contact is really important, as we've discussed in class. You need to make a lot of eye contact. So don't type out your speech entirely, otherwise you'll end up just reading off of it and you won't make a lot of eye contact. Make sure you just bring an outline up with you. This way you'll be forced to speak extemporaneously and you'll make a lot of eye contact. And then another area where students have lost points is not having a conclusion. As soon as they're done explaining their main points, some speakers will just end their speech abruptly without a summary and conclusion. So make sure you have a conclusion. And then finally, another common problem for speakers is excessive use of fillers. These are words like that really aren't words. They do nothing for the speech. They just fill in sort of those natural pauses, because no one likes awkward silence. So try to avoid those, otherwise you will lose points. So basically, it's important to prepare for this speech, to do a lot of research, and to practice. So be sure you practice your speech several times. I strongly recommend that you practice it in front of someone and have him or her time you, because if you go over the time limit, the 5 to 6 minutes, you will also lose points. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me at mark.grabowski@marist.edu. I'm also going to be posting supplemental information, videos, handouts, stuff like that on our website about how to outline, how to use visual aids, and also critiquing some previous informative speeches, so you have an idea of what speakers did well, what they needed to improve, and what I'll be looking for when I evaluate you.